Welcome back to another podcast of Road to Abundance. Today we have a special guest, an expert in the psychedelic field, Dr. Rick Doblin. And guys, I never had someone in this field, but as you know, it's a field that I really like. I'm actually developing a product with mushroom, and I've experienced a lot of different psychedelic. And when people ask me, why are you doing it? Now I wanted to bring an expert, a doctor that has a lot of knowledge for the last 40 years. I think he's been pushing for legalizing it. And how I encountered his work is, as you know, I do a lot of research for stuff that I do in my life. There's a reasoning behind, and he was in a multiple documentary. So I started researching a little bit more why he was pushing it. And now I'm happy to have him on my podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike. I'm so glad to be with you. Just to correct, I have a PhD from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. My PhD is in public policy. My dissertation was on the regulation of the medical use of psychedelics and marijuana. So I'm not a medical doctor. I'm just a PhD.
That's okay, because it's still the title and you still deserve it. And
Sure.
I know you're the president and founder of MAPS. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And then let's hear your story. How did you start that work like 40 years ago?
Yeah, well, actually it was 51 years ago how I got into it. But MAPS I started it in 1986, and I knew that I wanted the letter P to be in it for psychedelics. So I had to think about what would be the name of this nonprofit. So it stands for multidisciplinary, which means a range of different scientific perspectives. Association means loads of people coming together. Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic, which is a broad term for mind manifesting. And we make it so that it's not necessarily drugs. There's hyperventilation. There's other ways, fasting, other ways for people to have non-ordinary states of consciousness. So we use the word psychedelic broadly. And then the S is for studies, emphasizing science, research. And basically MAPS was started 1 year after MDMA was criminalized in the United States. And I had been involved suing the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, to try to keep the therapeutic use of MDMA still legally available to psychiatrists and therapists. And we won the case. The judge there said we should do that, but the DEA, the administrator of the DEA, rejected the recommendation and said, oh, we're going to criminalize. This was during Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan, and just say no. And people may remember there's famous ads of here's your brain on drugs, and there was a frying pan with like you're frying your brain to take drugs. None of that is really true. But it was something that was used to criminalize in 85. And so so we won a couple times in the appeals courts. Finally, the DEA figured out how to satisfy the appeals courts, and MDMA was criminalized. So MAPS was started as a nonprofit psychedelic pharmaceutical company with our goal to work through the FDA to develop MDMA into a prescription medicine. And now we're very close to that, but it's taken us 37 and a half years to do that. But we're leading the whole field. There's hundreds of for-profit psychedelic companies. We're the one that is completed 2 successful phase 3 studies. Phase 3 are the final studies, double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized studies that you need to try to prove safety and efficacy. And our phase 3 research was in the United States, Israel, and Canada. And everybody's looking for the FDA to go first. Once the FDA says yes, then we'll have, most likely, if the FDA says yes, Israel and Canada will follow shortly, then Europe. We're also working in Brazil, Australia, all around the world. So we also just had Psychedelic Science 2023, a big conference that took place.
Yeah, there's a lot of people.
Oh my God. It was the world's largest conference on psychedelics ever. 12,400 people at the Colorado
amazing.
Convention Center. It was shocking. It was fantastic. And we had bipartisan support. You know, we had an opening talk by the governor of Colorado and then the former governor of Texas, Rick Perry, who's a Republican. Yeah. So we have tremendous bipartisan support. And so we are very, very hopeful that we are in the midst of a psychedelic renaissance. So how did I start this? And
Yeah,
Um,
let's take a pause there. There's something I want to say. You might not be allowed to say it, but I'll say it in terms of like, guys, it's crazy to me that psychedelic, and I'm talking about medical use. Like when I talk about doing mushroom, doing ketamine, I have a ketamine therapy after this call. All those things should be done in a proper setting, like not just recreational. You go to a party, and that's not what I aim for. What I'm saying is you use that to heal your subconscious mind, to go heal trauma that would be hard to deal with, and to make sure that you become the best performance human that you can. And it's crazy to me that Tylenol, which destroy your body, that alcohol, which kill your brain, all those things are purely legal, FDA approved, corn syrup. But the thing that actually help you, it's so hard to get it legalized. And to me, it's crazy. It's like everything that's good for the human being, nah. We don't do that. We're gonna classify as substance one, which is the worst one. And it's for me, that's why and government has been pushing the anti-psychedelic for years, like the fried pan and all that stuff,
yes.
and it's not true. And they put fluoride in our toothpaste, which kill your brain. To me, it's just, and that's why I got interested in psychedelic, because I did mushroom when I was 15 for party, like, and then I was like, oh, and then I revisited mushroom later on, and I was like, whoa, that's a whole different experience. I was on a vibration bed, like going inside a journey. I was like, okay, this is the deal. Like this opens my field like nothing else. And then I did all of them, like ketamine, ibogaine, bufo. Like I tried it to see what's the difference in between, but always in a setting professional. Like ibogaine, I was in a medical center. I was on IV drip, like supervised. So amazing work. And I'm happy that people like you are out there and did the work before.
Wow. Thank you, Mike. I do say that I don't think fluoride is such a dangerous thing. But that's a whole different topic. But I do think that the war on drugs has never been about trying to reduce drug abuse. It's always been about persecuting minorities of different kinds and using the law to arrest them. One of the terrible situations in Florida, for example, the state of Florida, is that if you have a felony, then you can't vote. So the war on drugs has been used to take the vote away from a lot of people. And then when the people in Florida had an initiative to make it so that people who were felons could finally vote, it passed with well over 60%. But then the Republicans in the government, in the state government, made it so that you'd have to pay all these fines before you could vote, and then they wouldn't have a list of how much fines people had. So the war on drugs has been a war on people. It's not about science. So I do completely agree with what you're saying. There's no scientific basis for what we're doing. And it's been suppressed not only because of this idea of minorities, but we see the psychedelic 60s, and a lot of the people that were using psychedelics became opponents to the Vietnam War. And when President Nixon at the time, he said that he had two main enemies. The one was the civil rights movement, which of course is a terrible thing to have as an enemy. But the other was the hippies. And he said the hippies are out against Vietnam. And so he said, we will criminalize these drugs. And John Ehrlichman, who was his domestic policy advisor, in an interview came out and said, these were our enemies. Did we know we were exaggerating the risks of drugs? Of course we did. But it was designed to arrest them and put them in jail and break up their meetings. And so the war on drugs, there's no sense to it. But there's also another part, and this is, I think, Mike, you and your listeners, I think, will understand. It's when you've had these experiences, it's not easy. I mean, when you're doing ibogaine or bufo or anything, it's difficult. You're having emotions and thoughts and feelings. Your ego is dissolving. It's a challenge. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of willingness to feel your feelings. And so another part of this war on drugs is there's a lot of people that don't want to look inward, that they would rather not pay attention to what's going on because they know there's difficult emotions. And they're not always sure they can handle them. So psychedelics
they're easier to control too. Like if the people are not mastering their inner self, they don't make the best decision. It's easier to direct them than if they go inward and they heal themselves. Then we don't want to go to war. Like I know for a fact that when you do all those heart opener, you realize that we're all one consciousness, and why should we attack other country? Why should, like, you want to heal the world, you don't want to fight it.
That's exactly right. So, okay. So now that's the good transition. So 51 years ago, 1972, when I was 18 years old, I was a freshman in college, and I was doing LSD and mescaline. And but what was coming to me during these experiences were that sense that I was part of this larger world, that we tend to identify ourselves as just with our body, and we're born and we die and that's it. But you realize under psychedelics and other ways too, like sometimes with prayer or meditation or fasting or hyperventilation, other ways, that really we are just like a blip, a temporary blip, but we're on top of enormous billions of years of evolution, and we're all connected. And if you talk about the physics and quantum physics, and you talk, we know that at a deeper level, we're all just energy and vibrations, and there's really no separateness. We're all intimately connected with each other. And we know that from looking at DNA. Like the difference between an African American and a white person is trivial in terms of what's going on with the genetics. That we're way more similar to everybody than we are different. And once you have that experience and that feeling, then you have a different view of the human family. And then, you don't want to kill other people because they have a different religion or they're a different race or different country. And I think people are often manipulated by leaders based on fears and anxieties. I mean, look at Trump in America. He's stirring up the most negative emotions. He's a hateful man. He's trying to always attack other people, and people are scared and they're anxious, and it's tradition throughout thousands of years to have scapegoats for your problems. So what got me into psychedelics was very young. I'm Jewish, and I was born in 1953, and I was educated about the Holocaust. And if you really take that take that to heart, it's just unbelievable that human beings could do mass murder on other humans for irrational ideas. Like, but people their rational mind is overwhelmed by their primitive emotions. So that's why, Mike, when you talk about going inward and looking in and the work that you've done, it does take courage, but it also can help you to feel like your fears don't have to be overwhelming. I mean, we do a lot of work with post-traumatic stress disorder, where people are very frightened by their past experiences, and that colors everything that they think about where they are and who they're with. And so they bring that trauma from the past into the present, and it's never fully integrated into the past. And so what really got me into this was, as a young man, just having to wrestle with the fact that there's enormous inhuman cruelty that people are capable of. And one of the main ways that we're capable of that is by dehumanizing others. We are the master race. These people are inferior. They're bad genetics. Let's kill them all. You end up dehumanizing others, but this fundamental experience of interconnectedness, like that you mentioned, that has political implications. We're not so willing to trash the environment if the environment is part of us too. If we are part of nature, what we're doing to nature, and the number of species that are dying out right now or have already gone extinct, and what we're doing to the climate, what we're doing with this incredible, terrible proliferation of nuclear weapons, and so much money is going into weapons of mass destruction and all. So it was first off this confrontation with Hitler and with the Holocaust that made me really realize that there was psychological factors that threatened my life directly. Then, as a young man, I was in grammar school, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that was a period of time where it seemed like the US and Russia might go into a nuclear war and blow each other up. And I'm like, oh my God, it's not just the Germans and the Nazis. Now we could end up blowing up the whole world. And I ended up studying Russian in high school. And because I wanted to learn about the other, I also had relatives. My great grandparents came over from Russia to the US in around 1880 on one side. So I studied Russian, and my parents sent me to Russia in 1970. I spent the entire summer in Russia learning Russian with a group of US high school students, height of the Cold War. And I went for a walk with a Russian girl who worked where the school was. And we're walking on the beach, and I'm like, you don't want to kill me. I don't want to kill you. What is this whole, thought that the Russians and the Americans, we could blow each other up? So I
Yeah.
realized a lot of it is politicians and,
They need new target all the time. They need to keep people busy with the news. They're doing their job. Like I like when Tony Robbins says the news is doing what they're paid for. They need your eyeball on the target. So it's gonna be blood, murder, everything that's negative because that sells. So it's like they're gonna promote whatever, and they always need a new enemy, a new thing. It's like there's never like good thing there.
That's exactly right. And that's also the fear is that once people are ready to have scapegoats, who the target is doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's more, so Carl Jung, who's a psychologist, used to work with Freud, broke off with him, but he said the most important political, therapeutic, and spiritual thing we can do is to withdraw the projection of our shadow onto others. So what do you mean by that? Our shadow is the part of ourselves that we disown, the part that we don't like, the part that we don't see. And then in order to not deal with it, then we project it onto other people. Like they're the all evil. We're all good. And then you have to kill these other people, or then they're your enemy. Like what the Republicans are trying to do with to immigrants. I mean, it's terrible. We are a nation of immigrants, and immigration makes us strong. And instead of, so in any case, I was traumatized by the Holocaust, then by this whole Cuban Missile Crisis. When I went to Russia, I saw that there was so much propaganda that I was being fed. And then when I came home, and now I was in one of the last years of the lottery. Right now we have a volunteer military, but before that there was a lottery. And I decided, this is terrible. Now it's not just the Nazis, it's not just the Russians, it's my own country that's doing something aggressive that doesn't make sense, that's killing millions of people. And so I just started realizing more and more and more that it's about psychological factors. And at the same time that this was happening in the late 60s, early 70s, America was sending people to the moon. And some of the astronauts were coming back and saying, wow, I saw the Earth from space and we're all one thing. It's all one little thin blue, tiny blue dot floating in space. And some of the astronauts had spiritual experiences like that. So again, this is to point out that it's not just psychedelics that give you these perspectives, but it's a lot cheaper to take psychedelics than to be shot up in a rocket and look at the Earth from space.
Yeah. And I know you did, I know you're like me, like I'm certified on allotropic breathwork and breathwork. So I know that you were like, when I read that about you, I was like, wow, that's cool. It's like, it wasn't the trend. Even now, breathwork, I'm like certified before the trend, but breathwork gives me almost the same DMT release. But it's similar experience. And when I combine it with like a microdosing of mushroom, I get an experience that's out of this world just with my breath, like insane spiritual experience.
Yeah. And what that points out is that the experience is not in the drug. It's in us, that you can do this just through changing your breathing patterns and sometimes supplementing with, microdosing mushrooms or LSD or marijuana or whatever. But even without that, just with your breath, you can have these unusual experiences. And so the experience is not in the breath. It's inside us. It's inside our psyche. When you take a psychedelic, it releases experiences that are inside us, coded in our DNA, coded in our brains, in our whole heritage. So I think it makes it clearer when we talk about how psychedelics are not the only way to have these experiences, that they're fundamentally human experiences. And when you have them, they can have long-term implications. But I also liked, Mike, what you said really before about how it's not in the drug, it's in the context. You have to feel safe and supported. For Ibogaine, there are medical risks. It's important to have medical supervision. There are ways in which the psychedelics are just tools, and how we use the tool is up to us. And the tool, like any tool, you could have a hammer that you could build a house with, or you could hit somebody in the head with. It's kind of more neutral. The same way Stan Grof, the world's leading LSD researcher, is now 92 years old. He really started around 1955 in the Czech Republic. But what he has said is that psychedelics are for the study of the mind. Psychedelics used wisely and with proper caution are for the study of the mind what the telescope is for astronomy and the microscope is for biology and science and medicine. And so when we think back on the history of humanity, people were burned at the stake for what they said they believed because of what people saw through the telescope, that the Earth was considered to be the center of the universe. And then when you look through the telescope, you realize, oh my God, we're not actually the center of the universe. Everything doesn't revolve around us. And Galileo died under house arrest. And Father Bruno, who was a supporter of his, was burned at the stake for this. So the religious political authorities don't like being challenged, even when they've got just irrational things. And so what we have is a tool in psychedelics. Now we don't think of the telescope as all that controversial. It's teaching us about the universe. We're sending telescopes up in space of different kinds. And so we hope that what's going to happen with what has happened with the telescope will be what happens with psychedelics, that we will see them as tools. They can be used poorly. They can be used wisely. And what we're talking about is psychedelic assisted therapy. Meaning that really it's about therapy. And what we've chosen to do is, work with people that are highly sympathetic patients that are severely traumatized by all different kind of traumas, and that we are trying to help them to get over their past traumas so they could live more fully in the present. And we do a lot of work with veterans. Veterans get a lot of the media attention, but 2/3 of the people in our study are women. Most of the people who are traumatized are women with sexual abuse or domestic violence.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Like, I know that my goal, what I did with psychedelic and why I bring like you on the podcast, why I experience everything, is because also I want to prove, I know that a lot of your work and a lot of the work is for people with that we would say, oh, they have a lot of trauma, PTSD, but I want to say that it's for everyone. It's because everybody has trauma. I'm a high performance human, became a millionaire. I'm healthy, got a good family. Like, my wife is amazing. I'm going to be a father, and I still do it because everybody should be working on themselves. And then sometimes the traumas feel so hard because your subconscious mind is primed for survival. So when you approach something that it feels threatened and is comfort and survival, it will feel hard on you. So when you have those assisted therapy, it's like releasing it with softness, with tenderness. Like, it's okay, just release it. Like you said, it dissolve your ego. So when their ego doesn't feel threatened, you can remove the mask and be yourself, and then just let it go. And there's so many sexual abuse, way more than we think, and those trauma are often hidden. So I like those therapy, and could be. Everybody has trauma because they develop from like 2 to 7, like most of the trauma. So we don't remember, but they dictate our life. So that's why I love that everybody should do those therapy.
Well, yeah, I think that people need to do therapy of different kinds. You could do psychedelics, you could do breathing, as you said, breath work. I trained with Stan Groff in the breath work from 1988 to 1990, and we got together for 2 weeks, a group of about 30 of us, every 6 months for 3 years. So we would do deep, deep work during these 2 weeks. Then we would go back off to our lives. And then we would come back again, and people would see from each other, what was the impact of these deep experiences? Did we integrate them into our lives? That's the other part that we should emphasize here, is that the experience in a safe, supported setting is critically important, and you need to go deep, deep into it. But the real contribution to long-term change is what's called integration. So, try to get out of the sense. So that what we need to do is to really make the experience that we've had under psychedelics or under breath work or meditation, whatever, we need to think about it and work on it emotionally and intellectually afterwards. And so what our therapeutic approach is, it's 3.5 months of therapy. It's our first study was with severe PTSD. Our second study was moderate to severe PTSD. These are the phase 3 studies. And that what we ended up doing is a method where people get MDMA or therapy without MDMA as the control group, they have 3 8-hour sessions, and they're roughly 1 month apart. And there's 2 therapists, well, 2 people. One is a licensed therapist. The second one doesn't need to have a license. It's sort of helping. First could be a student or an apprentice to get a license. And there's 3 of these 8-hour sessions, roughly 1 month apart. But then there's 12 90-minute non-drug sessions as well. 3 90-minute non-drug sessions for the preparation to build what's called a therapeutic alliance, to build connections between the patients and the therapist, for the therapist to understand the patient understand what MDMA has done, to develop trust and safety and encourage to let things out instead of suppress them. We do ask people if they're on SSRIs or antidepressants. We ask them to stop using them. So they have to taper off. Those will blunt the effect of MDMA. And so I think that's difficult for some people. So we have to really watch them closely as they are tapering off of their antidepressants. Oftentimes their symptoms will come back, because what the antidepressants do is they suppress the symptoms. They cut off the highs, they cut off the lows, they have sexual side effects, they have other issues, but they don't get to the root problem. They're sort of just like a cover-up. They can be helpful for some people, and some people may decide that that's enough. But a lot of times other people will say, I want to go deeper. I want to look at the root causes. And psychedelics do that. So we have 3 90-minute sessions after each experimental session for integration. And so it's a total of 42 hours of therapy. And then we look at people at 2 months after the last experimental session. And that's when we compare the people that had therapy with MDMA to the people that had therapy without MDMA. And what we've shown in the paper that we just published is that almost 3/4, 72% of the people that had moderate to severe PTSD no longer qualified for a diagnosis of PTSD after the therapy. It's astonishing. Amazing. And then there's another bunch of people that had what's called clinically significant reductions of PTSD symptoms. It changed their life, but they still do have PTSD. But those are still called responders. And when you add that up, we've got like 87% of people are responders. And these are people that have had PTSD often for years and have tried psychotherapy, tried medication. So how is it that the results that we get are so great? And it's because of the pharmacological properties of MDMA. So if you have PTSD, it changes your brain. And before I get into that, I'll just say that I agree with you, Mike, too, that just reading the newspaper can be traumatizing. Seeing the news, seeing what's happening to climate change, to the environment, it's terrible. So we all have some kind of fears and anxieties. And so I do believe that there's one part, which is when we try to medicalize, it's usually for people that have a disorder and we want to help them make more normal. But it's also for people who are, quote, normal to make them more effective. And I think that's a lot about what you're about, is optimal performance. How do we take people that are more or less coping in life, but help them excel, help them have more joy, more success? And that's to clear out a lot of these internal emotions that are problematic, that are fear. So we see the world through this filter. And what Stan Grof has talked about is, and you talked about the ego, he said the ego, you become transparent to the transcendent. It's like you wash the window and now you can see the wider world.
You're gonna see through your ego. And the thing is, why I want to push it, like, for everybody, not necessarily to do psychedelic, like you said, but to do breath work, to do all those modality, because the suicide rate are through the roof. And it's not necessarily from people that have PTSD, especially for men. The last few years, it's crazy the amount of suicide. And the thing is, men have trouble expressing their emotion. They don't want to do it, or they don't have no one to talk to. And then if there was a place like that they would feel comfortable either to do breath work, that's why I try to push men to do breath work. If they could go to therapy like that, if they could do things, it would heal the world, like one person at a time or a group of person at a time. And that's the goal. It's like, we never been so mentally sick as a society and so evolved from what we know. Like, they might be more evolved before, but from what they tell us right now, we're the most evolved. So it's like, it's not normal that with all the AI and technology, we regress in our mind. Like it's to me, it makes no sense. And that's why I really like this movement of like healing yourself, doing the work, going through the shadows, and with all those modalities.
Yeah, that is great. Another way to think about it is that in terms of human evolution and development, our brains are brilliant. I mean, Mike, the fact that you and I can be doing this podcast from different locations, I'm seeing you in real time. We're talking in real time. It's being recorded. And then through the internet, we're in the thin air between us. You've got vibrations that you can connect to all the information that's on the internet. It's just incredible. So our minds are brilliant, but our emotions and spiritual connections are primitive still.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we need this emotional and spiritual development to catch up with the technologies, because the technologies can destroy us. In terms of just looking at global warming and global climate change and things and the nuclear weapons. So that's why 51 years ago, 1972, when I first read Stan Grof's book about the LSD research, and it was right after it shut down, I thought this is a good way to fight back for a better world, to try to bring back these psychedelic tools to help people feel how interconnected we all are, and to be an antidote to genocide, to racism, to tribalism. So all of that is the background. So what does MDMA actually do? If you have PTSD, it changes your brain. And so the amygdala is the part of our brain that responds to fear. It's where we process fear. And when people have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, they have a hyperactive amygdala, meaning that they're in a fear state. It's like fight or flight. They're high intensity energy, frightened by things, everything, like a noise that you would maybe think, oh, that's just a noise. They think, oh, that's a bomb or something. So that their amygdala is hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain where we think logically, the newest part of our brains, there's less activity in the prefrontal cortex when you have PTSD. You're so triggered by various emotions and things that happened that you're not logical anymore. And that's where we get to people being manipulated by politicians based on these raw emotions. And then also the trauma that people have experienced doesn't ever feel really over. It's not really in the past. It's always about to happen, or it is happening. And so the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that has where we put memories into long-term storage, there's less activity there if you have PTSD. So these memories don't ever get put into the past. They're always about still happening. So that's PTSD. And people withdraw. They have nightmares. They don't sleep well. They're very much isolated from themselves and isolated from other people. It's a way in which the past colors the present in such a way that people are often unable to work, and it really changes their relationships with everybody. They can't trust anything. All right. So what does MDMA do? MDMA reduces activity in the amygdala where we are processing fear. So you have a fear-based memory, but it doesn't trigger the same kind of fright and fear. That people are able to remember traumas in a deeper, better way, to process them, to experience the emotions, to think carefully in ways that they weren't at the time. And MDMA increases activity in the prefrontal cortex, meaning that it increases our ability to think logically and to not be overwhelmed by our emotions. And it increases activity in the hippocampus and connectivity between amygdala and hippocampus, so that memories from past traumas, we're able to reflect on them, experience them. There's a great book by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about trauma. But
I heard about it.
Yeah. So Bessel is the principal investigator of our Boston site and is about to be publishing a paper on how effective MDMA is for.
And what about the like all those myths? I remember when I was young and we were doing MDMA, and people are like, there's two things that I read recently about HTTP5 that it doesn't really help with that, because it's a false statement that MDMA empty the whole thing.
Right.
There's like a gland that they say that it's all empty, and that's why you're so euphorical and you're so happy. Can you tell us like the fact? Like, does it happen? like I heard recently that HTTP5 is not needed because it doesn't really happen like that. So what's your state on that?
Well, when we very first started the research, I started MAPS in 1986. We had 5 protocols all rejected by the FDA from Harvard Medical School, UC San Francisco, elsewhere. But in 1992, we got the first permission to work in humans with MDMA. And this was a safety study. And people had used 5-HTP, which is a precursor to serotonin, to sort of ease the come down, they've said. And so we went to the FDA, and the FDA said, don't do anything like that. We just don't want to assume anything that has been learned from people using MDMA in an underground way. We're only going to look at the data that we generate from scientific studies. And they said, don't give 5-HTP. Don't do anything like that. Just give the MDMA and see what problems there are, and then see if you need to figure out one way to reduce those problems. And so we have then started our research with MDMA. We do the sessions during the day, starting at around 10 in the morning. So, recreationally, people take it at night. They don't sleep. They drink alcohol with it. They take, set doses after doses after doses, different things. So in our research now, that's basically 31 years after 1992, when we started the research, we do not give any of these drugs. We have not found a need to do it. But what we do say is that the second day, now this is again for therapy, but it would apply to people that are taking it, quote, in non-medical, celebratory, or recreational context. It's important to take the next day to rest and to think about it. So when you just rest and you do the integration, we have the therapist come to work with the person the day after the MDMA experience, as well as during the MDMA experience. So there are images that Oprah put out back in around 2001 of people with holes in their brain from MDMA. And
what's all that?
That is complete propaganda. What they've done is they've taken activity, their SPECT scans, which look at activity in the brain. And they just took every area that was below a certain amount of activity, and they just showed it as a hole in the brain. Completely fraudulent, designed to scare people. So when we talk about the old anti-drug ads with the frying pan and the egg and you're frying your brain, it's not about the facts. Again, the drug war is built on fears. I grew up believing that if you took LSD 5 or 6 times, you were certifiably insane. And so suddenly
that's the whole media and government in a nutshell. It's like, and it's crazy for everything that happened over the last few years. Let's not name anything, but it's like they're going to say whatever they want. And that's why I like having someone like you, especially for a substance like that there's so many myths and non-thing that are non-factual that people say for years, like the brain, that this, that, and it's going to kill you. Of course, if you have an off lab that is horrible, that they mix, we don't know what with it, yes, there's a risk. But if you do it in a clinical with the right stuff that is clean, actually from my studies, and it's people like you that I look documentary facts, I look at studies, there was no risk. Like from what I've seen, it's like when it's done properly, there was no risk, no really damage on the brain. Like, and it was crazy to me because I was raised on all those fears, like, don't take that. You're done after 2-3 times. And you're like, should I do it?
Yeah, I wouldn't quite say there's no risk. I think the risks are more psychological, but you are not hurting your brain in that way. And in fact, when you're able to process trauma, as I said, trauma changes your brain. People with PTSD have a brain that is not functioning normally. And we're trying to help people process the trauma so that then they can function normally. So there is no significant hurt to your brain. And in fact, what's been so delightful over the last almost 40 years is the idea of neurotoxicity, which is what was used to say, your brain is going to be destroyed in different ways. It's moved from neuroplasticity to from neurotoxicity to neuroplasticity. And what that means is that when you take psychedelics, it makes it so your brain is more capable of changing itself, of rerouting memories and feelings in more pro-social, healthier ways. So,
and how long is the neuroplasticity for the MDMA?
It lasts a couple weeks afterwards. So
Oh, that's amazing.
yeah, so there's a researcher, Doblin at Johns Hopkins. I was just with her a couple of days ago, and she's done studies with ketamine and LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, ibogaine, about how long does this neuroplasticity actually last. And what she showed is that the longer you're in the psychedelic state, for example, ibogaine can be 24 hours. That
3 months. It was 3 months of neuroplasticity. That's why I done it.
Yes.
It's never seen before, because mushroom is 1 week. I didn't know MDMA was a few weeks, but ibogaine is 3 months that you can rewire your mind. And that's what I coach. The integration is to rewire your mind. And it's amazing. Like, people don't know about that stuff.
That's critical. Yeah, because what we're trying to do is different from a normal pharmaceutical company. What pharmaceutical companies have done in the past is, here's a drug to reduce your symptoms, and you need to take it every day for the rest of the years, the decades, your life, and it's really good for the pharma company. What we're trying to do is to say, it's not the drug, it's the therapy. The drug will make the therapy more effective, but we're going to do a deep dive into your subconscious and your unconscious in a safe, supportive setting with trained therapists. And our goal is to make it so that at the end of this therapy, you don't need MDMA anymore.
Yeah.
That's why we only give it 3 times. That's in part why, big pharma isn't that interested in these kind of things. So that, and also big pharma doesn't know anything about psychotherapy. They just know about the drug.
They give a drug, and when the drug is going to, like, I know for a fact, like, because my sister had a car accident. It's been 11 years that she has a chemistry imbalance in her brain. So I'm going to get her to do ibogaine because it helps with that. And the thing is, the solution for the medical was, we're going to give you a drug to balance temporarily your mind. It's going to kill your liver. When your liver is done, we're going to give you another drug that will kill your kidney. And when that is done, then we're going to see what we do with you. But then you end up with no kidney, no liver, and you still have your problem. And that's thousands of dollars of prescription. And not only that, we're going to give you those pill makes you hyperactive. So we're going to give you sleeping pill, and then we're going to give you calming pill. And then, and it's like, what is going on? Like, what are you trying to help people? You're not trying to help you, because ill people, they don't make money. And I've seen it firsthand I had medical stuff going on. I had a team of 36 doctors. They didn't do anything. My sister has been through it. So that's where I was like, I need to find other way to really, like, remove all that energy and get it flowing the right way and not destroy your whole body.
That is great. Is your sister open to it?
Yeah. So right now it's like, I need to talk with the center. So the whole thing is like, like, I talked with my mom. She was open to it. Again, like, now my sister, she got pregnant. So obviously you can't do ibogaine with the baby. Not that I know, because it's 12 hours. So the thing is also, like, all the doctors are going to be like, don't do it, because you need to stop the meds. Every time you're going to do one of those therapy, you need to stop the meds. So then my mom is scared that she has a receding and then stuff like that. So, but I know that those substances will fix the imbalance. And the people told me that they helped a guy that had a trauma from a car accident, which is the same she had. And one time ibogaine, he was cured. And her, it's been 11 years. So for me, it's insane that they do that type of stuff. And in Canada, it's free, like the insurance pay, whatever. But it's basically the people paying for it, because we pay more taxes and stuff. Now I live in the United States, but it's like the system pay for it no matter what. So the pharma still does their money. And for me, it's insane that it works like that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it is a difficult situation with your sister, but keep in mind that raising a baby is difficult. And when you have emotional problems on top of that, it makes it even more difficult. And so I would hope that, shortly after she has a healthy baby, that she might think to take a couple days off and, have the support.
She called me. She knew I wouldn't be so happy, because I advised not to get a baby so soon. Like, but it's not my life, like, everybody's on their own journey. I'm happy for her if she's happy. But yeah, the thing is, like, obviously the ibogaine therapy is expensive. So she doesn't have the money. So I need to put that money and so it's like I need to dedicate, like, tens of thousands. I think it's $11,000 or $13,000 for the therapy. So the thing is like, and I would want to send my mom at the same time, and then I need to pay for the flight. So we're talking about a $30,000 situation. So it's just like, that's what I was waiting for. But yeah, it's just sad to see that there's nothing to help those people. And my sister is one of the case. Like there's so many of them.
Well, there's 13 million PTSD patients just in America.
Yeah.
There's estimates that are over 350 million PTSD patients in the world. And I think that's a dramatic underestimate. So many people are traumatized. There's an estimate that by 2050, if we don't do a lot of change to the climate, there could be 1 billion climate refugees who can no longer live where they're living because they can't grow enough food, or there's droughts or anything like that. So I think the stresses on humanity as a whole are going to be increasing over time. And I think psychedelic assisted therapy can play a major role in helping individuals and writ large societies cope with the stresses, so that we can end up using the brilliance of our minds to solve a lot of these problems. There's no shortage of resources. Nobody should starve in the world. There's just a shortage of compassion and an abundance of greed. And so we need to really reframe who is part of our family. It's not just people from my country or my religion or my tribe or my race. We're all in it together. And if we can get to that point of realizing that, we can really harness the brilliance of our mind to have more equitable distribution of resources. And I think it's the emotions that cause people to respond to leaders who manipulate them by fears and anxieties. And so I just want to add that in addition to what we're trying to do with drug development and, try to explode these myths of holes in your brain, or I don't know if you heard the myth about MDMA drains your spinal fluid, but a lot of people.
No, I didn't.
Oh, good. Well, it's not true. But a bunch of people had this idea that MDMA drains your spinal fluid. And I'm like, how is that even possible? I mean, but in any case, people believe all sorts of stuff. For a long time, we were told that LSD hurts your chromosomes and you're going to have deformed babies. In fact, in 1989, when I had a lunch with the woman that later became my wife, we're about to be married for 30 years. But in our first lunch, she said she was wanting to talk to me about a psilocybin trip she had in college that really influenced her a lot. But she said, I would never want to have a long-term relationship with anybody like you. And I'm like, well, why is that? And she said, well, your chromosomes are so screwed up from all of your LSD. And I'm like, I couldn't believe she believed it. But in any case, there's all this misinformation. And then also, on the other hand, there's all this sort of misinformation that it's all about the drug. All you have to do is take the drug and you'll be enlightened and all this. And as I think we've both pointed out, it's about the context, the therapy, the support. And it's only with that, and then only doing the work to do the integration, that you end up, during this period of neuroplasticity, that you end up making long-term change. So where we're at right now is that we hope by the end of this year, December or so, we hope to submit all of our data to the FDA to ask for approval for prescription use of MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD. We think there's a good chance that'll happen around June or so of 2024. Shortly after that, we think Canada and Israel should approve, because we've done research there and we're in connection with their regulatory authorities. And then we move to Europe and, Australia, Brazil, Japan. So
that's amazing.
Our long-term vision is a world of net zero trauma by 2070. And what I mean by that is it's not no trauma. Net zero just means you're not adding. So there's both trauma and then there's multi-generational trauma. And researchers, particularly this woman, Rachel Yehuda at the Bronx VA, has identified epigenetic mechanisms. These are mechanisms, our genes, our genetics don't change in one generation, but what we can do is turn certain genes on and off. And that's called epigenetics, above the genetics. And that
the environment that controls the gene.
It controls, what turns the gene on and off.
Yeah.
And so it looks like, and this is some preliminary evidence, but we're interested in studying this further to see if it's really the case, but that through successful therapy for PTSD, these epigenetic mechanisms can change just through your own, they change through your life and then they can change back. So that what we're hoping to do is to get to a world where we're not increasing the amount of new traumas and also unresolved traumas that get passed in different ways to the next generation through
Yeah.
this. And so what that means for us is going all over the world to look where there's high amounts of trauma, even if they don't have any money, and do this in a humanitarian way. And so that's this idea
That's
of net
beautiful.
zero trauma by 2070. And then if we reach that, then we start trying to reduce the global total burden of trauma as well, instead of just
Yeah.
adding to
Because
it.
parents that have trauma, like you said, like epigenetic, I studied a lot of Bruce Lipton, his work on epigenetic that framed so many other myths on genetic that were passed on cancer and all that stuff. But the thing is, the environment will dictate our gene, and the parents is part of the environment. So if the parents is full of trauma, he's going to pass down those trauma from 2 to 7 years old. So the kid is going to have a lot of trauma growing up, which is why I'm so happy that I get my kid at 33, 32, and I did so much work on myself, because I don't blame my parents and I don't blame anybody. But the thing is, when you have kid at 22, 23, you don't even know who you are.
Right.
So it's like how much fucking trauma you give to your baby, how much things, like you said with my sister, it's like, fix your thing and then think about bringing another human. And I think a lot of people, it's not that you shouldn't have kids. It's like, think that you're bringing another human being, that you're going to be responsible for this person for like setting that person for life. Now you feed him sugar, fat, all that stuff, plus the trauma. Wow, what a beginning of life.
A challenge. So I want to switch just for a second about the use in business and the use. So, we've mostly talked about therapy. That's the way to change people's minds. That's the way to work through the FDA. But I do believe that in the future, you could have a group of people that work at a company together and they go off on a retreat and they all get MDMA or ketamine or marijuana
That's my work.
or micro doses of this or that. And then they brainstorm and they come up with
Yeah,
new ideas. Now, I think that any new ideas that you get when you're under the influence of drugs, you need to think about again when you're not under the influence of drugs.
yeah,
But a lot of good ideas really do come up. And so I think
a
that there'll
lot.
be a lot of future business retreats for people that are looking for creative breakthroughs. And we hear a lot about microdosing in Silicon Valley and how people are using it to be more creative. But I want to talk about one study that was done with psilocybin. This is about
Yeah,
15 years ago. And it's called semantic priming. So what I mean is, I say day, most people will say night. I say sun, most people say moon. So you say a word and then people are asked to say what first comes to their mind. And
yeah,
do that in a normal kind of what's most often used with those things. But under the influence of psilocybin, when they do these same experiments, people have a wider range of associations. So I might say day and you might say
warm.
warm or something like that, or sunburn or whatever.
Yeah,
So that this idea is that psilocybin in this context is demonstrating an impact on creativity, that we don't stick in the same patterned responses. You have a wider range. Now, not all those are going to be good ideas again, but I think that in the future, we will have retreats where people go to. They may all be fine in terms of depression, anxiety, PTSD, but they may want to come up with new ideas.
yeah, that's my work.
Yeah,
Like that's in my business plan. I have retreat like that I want to make, and that's why I want to bring awareness, because it's good for everyone. And like I said, it changed my life, and that's why I started studying, because I was like, there's misinformation, and that's why I like to bring people like you, because my work, when you do your part of the work and you make it that people see what it is for real, then I can create those retreats and I can get people not to be scared. Because even I was in a business meeting 2 days ago and I was talking to a guy and he's like, I'm scared of doing it. I'm like, okay, like if you're scared, I'll get you with my doctor for ketamine. Start with ketamine, and then you can think about mushroom or ibogaine. I know that there's a level to it. Like it's not everybody that want to start with the ibogaine or anything like that. So start with a 1 hour ketamine or MDMA that you're familiar with. And it's just like when we open the field for people to really think, it opened possibility for human to work together and create even more beauty.
That's fantastic. I really look forward to that, helping you try to create those situations. And that, so just to expand on that, we are interested in, making psychedelics into medicines and marijuana into medicines, but we also believe that the drug war and prohibition is counterproductive. It makes things worse. We had in America last year, over 100,000 people died of opiate and fentanyl overdoses. When you have prohibition, you have drugs that are mixed with other things. You don't have quality standards. So we want to make it so that these drugs are legally available to people outside of religion, outside of medicine, and that we need honest drug education. We need pure drugs. We need peer support. We need harm reduction. And so that's the world that we're envisioning, that we're trying to build. Is starts with helping people understand that there are medical potentials when these drugs are used in therapeutic situations. And if we can demonstrate that, then I think people are going to start to question, why are they illegal for everybody, for anything? And eventually we'll get to the point where you're talking about, where you'll be able to take a business retreat to think about problems. And there was incredible research in the 60s by a fellow named Willis Harman and Jim Fadiman, where they did work with mescaline, actually, and LSD, with people that had scientific and business problems. And they would give them the psychedelics to help them think new ideas. And it worked really pretty well. So people could look at Jim Fadiman, Fadiman, in the scientific literature, and you'll find some of these studies. It's really interesting. So I think we're at a paradigm shift where humanity is at a crisis, and we need to address these crises with the full capabilities. We can't do it with fears and anxieties that make it so we don't think as logically, we don't think as collectively, we make enemies where we don't need to make enemies. So I think I'm very hopeful about how things will develop over time. The 12,400 people that came to psychedelic science at the MAPS website, so maps.org, we're just starting to post all of the talks that were given at Psychedelic Science. So this is the latest information.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll have hundreds there. We ask people if they want to make a donation. If they don't feel they can afford it, they can watch it for free. So just go to maps.org or psychedelicscience.org, and you'll be able to educate yourself on all of these videos. We are looking to build our membership, so we'd appreciate if people want to become a MAPS member, because we are a nonprofit. We've spun off the for-profit pharma company, and it's not in a normal company, because normal companies maximize profits, and that has proven to be disastrous in a lot of different ways. So there's a new modification of capitalism called a public benefit corporation, where you are trying to increase public benefit. Like, for example, if you look at Exxon or Shell or all these oil companies, they're not paying anything for global warming. They should, the same way that tobacco companies had to start paying for lung cancer and things like that. So we should get a lot of taxes from the oil companies. But in general, when you have a for-profit company, externalities, these things that affect society, they're not part of the balance sheet. And it's just their costs you impose on others. So the Public Benefit Corp really does take all that into account, and it doesn't maximize profits. It tries to maximize public benefit and still make profits, but not necessarily as much, because you don't want to pollute. You don't want to have all these externalities. So we've created the MAPS Public Benefit Corp, which is our pharmaceutical arm, and that's the group that's going to be trying to get FDA approval. So MAPS, as the nonprofit, is looking to do more research with cannabis, with ibogaine. We're looking at MDMA for conflict resolution. There's Israelis and Palestinians, small groups of them that are more of the open-minded of them, that are doing MDMA and ayahuasca together to try to, again, build these bonds and bridges. So there's a lot of exciting work that we're wanting to do ahead. And I'm just really grateful for this opportunity, Mike, to be able to do some public education, because we're getting the data that the regulators need, but really it's about cultural acceptance. And for that, we need public education. And so that's why I'm really glad that's why I said yes to speak with you, because we really need to educate people and say, you're not going to cause holes in your brain. You're not going to drain your spinal fluid. You're not going to hurt your chromosomes. But at the same time, these experiences have to be approached with respect. You could take psychedelics and you could end up worse off. But if you do it in a safe, supportive way, the chances that you'll be better off are much increased.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. And why I like to why I wanted to bring you is because I talk to people, and even though I know the data, I did hours, countless hours of research, like 200, 300 hours on psychedelic. When I bring them the fact, sometimes if you're not a doctor or you didn't, like, you've been in the field for 51 years
Yeah.
now, it's credibility behind what I've been teaching. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, this is real. What Mike has been saying is like, that's the fact. Like, we can dispute it. And I like that people do things based on fact. Like, it's there's so many myths in every field, like fitness, training, all that stuff. And like you said, I'll emphasize one last time, it's like taking steroids without going to the gym. Yeah, you might feel some benefit, but at the end, it's not like anything crazy. So doing psychedelic, if you don't do meditation and therapy and you don't do the work, it has some benefit, but nothing crazy. So make sure that if you're going to do those substance, if you want to do the therapy, make sure that you do it in a proper setting and that you do the work, the integration, either with someone like a therapist. If you don't want to use a therapist, you can use a coach like me. If you don't want to, like, find someone that you can do the work with. That's really important.
I think that's essential, really, because you're letting down your sense of who you are. When you take psychedelics, you become more vulnerable and you become inner focused. So to have somebody there that's familiar with the inner landscape, that protects you, that builds a safe place, it's really critically important. And so I think that people can learn a lot. We call it the videotapes of our psychedelic science. We call it the virtual trip. So we want to invite people to the virtual trip, and you go to maps.org or psychedelicscience.org, and you can learn an enormous amount. And if you have the time, you know, there's another 200-300 hours of videotapes to watch.
Yeah, I love it. Like, that's what I do for fun. Like I don't party. It's like I stopped when I was 23, 24. It's been 8 years. What I do is research. So I like to educate people, and I like to do the research and summarize it and bring experts. So that's why I started the podcast at the beginning, to open consciousness on a lot of different topics, including psychedelic and consciousness. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And guys, make sure that you go do the virtual trip. Make sure that you go to Maps so you can have the right information. There's a lot of documentary too. There's some that Rick is in. Like, there's so many good stuff right now. There's some on Netflix. There's a lot on Gaia. Gaia is a streaming platform for consciousness and all the good. So I would switch my Netflix for Gaia if I was you. I'm not sponsored, guys. I would just do it. Stop watching the news and start educating yourself. And where else then? It's maps.org. Where else they can find you, like where they can follow you and stuff?
Well, I try to put up all my podcasts. We have social media, so they could look at me through Instagram or through Twitter, or X, I guess we call it now. Or also through, LinkedIn, Facebook, things like that. So I'm pretty.
I'll get your link from your assistant, and I'll put them. Great. And I'll get a nice picture and I'll put it for the thumbnail. And guys, thank you very much for watching. Rick, you want to say any last word?
Yeah. I would say that there's some deep reservoirs of love and connection. I didn't mention that MDMA releases oxytocin, which is the hormone of love, connection, nursing mothers. So that there's, for those people that think they're in love and they're fine, there are often deeper levels that we can experience. And so I'd like to encourage people to really explore to do this inner work. That's what will make it so that the outer world will turn out to be better for all of us.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much for all the work you've done. It's because of people like you that today I'm able to share that I got interested in psychedelic and that I dive back into all that, and people like you that will make the work and pave the way for legalizing it and doing the right thing. And I'm really fighting for the same thing. I'm not going to do the PTSD work. It's not my calling, but I have a calling to help other men and entrepreneurs, and you're paving the way to get me to do that in the future. That's why I wanted to thank you. And guys, make sure you go see MAP. If you have the privilege of having money, you can do donation. It's an important work that he's doing. And I'll see you in another podcast, guys. Have a beautiful day.